Huawei just launched a new P series device, and considering how good the P30 series was, I was super interested to see what the new P40 series had to offer. The live stream came and went, and the spec sheets for the three new devices, the P40, the P40 Pro, and the P40 Pro Plus, yes, naming is getting more and more confusing in the phone world, and frankly, on paper at least, they didn't disappoint. Now here in the US and a good portion of the Western world, this launch is tarnished, just as the Mate 30 series was, by the fact that thanks to an embargo between the US and China, Google has stopped being able to do business with Huawei, and therefore Huawei's not able to include GMS or Google Mobile services on the device. We'll go into more detail about that a bit later, promise. But for now, let's just say that I've been using the P40 Pro as my main phone with my actual SIM card in it for a bit now, and well, I was surprised. But before we go into all that, since Huawei did send me a P40 Pro review unit to borrow, and I've had some time with it as I mentioned, I figured I'd try to do a complete walkthrough on it for you guys. Now if you're not familiar, complete walkthroughs channels where I try to go through every single feature I possibly can on a new device so that you guys are better prepared should you be in the market to actually go buy one. With that said, there's a lot to go through. So let's get started with the hardware. Firstly, the P40 Pro has a 6.58-inch OLED display with a resolution of 2640 by 1200 and a 90 Hz refresh rate. That refresh rate can be controlled too, but only in the way that you can select high for up to 90 Hz and normal for up to 60 Hz. So there is no way to force it to always use 90 Hz like some other devices let you, and you just have to trust the software to decide when 90 Hz is useful or not, which will probably be better for battery life at least. Now that display is curved, but it's curved a bit differently than normal. Instead of curving over the two sides like we're used to on a lot of flagships now, it also curves at the top and bottom. Well, the glass does, not the screen necessarily. Side by side next to the Galaxy S20 Ultra, for example, shows that the glass is curved more, but the display itself isn't. So I found it isn't as prone to accidental taps like other curved screens, but it still gives it a little bit more of a modern look with that curved glass, which looks really good. And honestly, when combined with the size of this phone, it feels really good too. The idea for this design, we were told, was to mimic the look of water in a cup just about to overflow, but keeping held in place by surface tension. Basically, water molecules' ability to cling to each other and resist spilling over like gravity would like them to. Science. Inside that screen, we have a 32 megapixel f2.2 aperture camera that is not binned and actually shoots in the full 32 megapixel size. Something interesting to note about the front camera though is that it also supports autofocus. Now, I know that sounds like something that should always just be in a camera in general, but actually most manufacturers don't include it in their front camera. Part of the reasoning seems logical enough in that most people's arm's length don't differ terribly, so there's no need for it to really have to focus like that, but it's still cool that it can do it. Next to that camera, we have a depth sensor to help the phone figure out subjects from backgrounds for portrait mode, but also it uses infrared technology in it, and it can be used to make for a faster, more accurate facial recognition as well. And it is pretty snappy. The phone comes in 5 colors. We have a silver and black, but we also have some really cool multi-layered colors, which, to give credit where it's due, Huawei was the first to push these crazy colors back when the P20 lineup was out. Here we have blush gold, deep sea blue, and ice white, which is what I have here. We have an aluminum frame sandwiched between glass on the front and back. No mention of Gorilla Glass or whatever type of glass that it might be. The phone is IP68 rated, meaning that it can be submerged for up to 30 minutes at a depth of 1.5 meters. Moving around the phone, we have nothing on the left. On the right, we have our volume buttons and power button. At the top, we have seemingly nothing, but this black dot in the middle is actually an infrared transmitter. Now, this is a feature we've seen on a few devices in the past, but hasn't really been on that many besides some other Huawei devices. You can use this and the included Smart Remote app to turn the phone into a universal remote for your TV, your air conditioning, a camera, basically most things that have an IR receiver. Now it's becoming less and less useful as more and more things are becoming smart and can be controlled over Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, but it's still kind of a little neat thing to have, and they don't even mention it when they're talking about the phone and its features. And when we're eventually all allowed to go back out and be around other human beings, it's great fun to use at bars to mess with said human beings. Continuing to the bottom of the phone, we have our mono speaker. Now, there is an earpiece speaker, but it actually vibrates the screen to produce sound for calls. Cool, I know. And it sounds fine, by the way, but they don't seem to engage it for anything else, as it probably needs your ear to be close to it to sound good. Regardless, the one speaker is pretty loud and sounds decent. Next to that, in this model at least, we have our SIM card slot and also support for a secondary eSIM as well. And we have our nano memory card slot, which is Huawei's own proprietary memory format that is the same size as a SIM card. There is also apparently a dual actual SIM version for some markets as well. Lastly, on the bottom, we have our USB-C port that is capable of using the 40-watt fast charger that comes in the box to charge the 4200 milliamp battery inside it. But as we do, let's do an unscientific test and plug it in and see how it does. Now, speaking of the battery, here's my battery usage and screen on time for a couple of typical days while using it. Now, of course, I'm in my own apartment all day and night right now because of the quarantine, so it's not quite typical, but should give you some idea, at least, for the battery life. And considering that Huawei has always been one of the best phones with regards to battery life, I'm not surprised that this phone is no different. The device also supports wireless charging at a max of 27 watts, which is nuts. But, unfortunately, this would require a special wireless charger from Huawei. Now, I did actually manage to find ones that you can buy on the western side of the world, and I'll leave a link below to that, should you be interested. We also have fast reverse wireless charging that supposedly can support up to 27 watts of power coming out of the phone to wirelessly charge any wirelessly charging capable device that you place on the back. Under the hood, it's running Huawei's own chipset, the Kirin 990 5G, and that is paired with 8 gigs of RAM and the choice of either 128, 256, or 512 gigs of storage, which, again, you can expand, but only by using nano memory cards, which, by the way, when I found them, they seem to be about twice the price of the similarly sized microSD card, when I looked here in the States at least. For security, we have the aforementioned facial recognition, but we also have an optical fingerprint sensor under the display that is pretty responsive. For connectivity, we have Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.1, and Sub-6 5G on certain models. For info on 5G and how it all works, you can check out my Decoder episode. It's a series where I do explainer videos regularly on the tech around us, and you can find that at the link here. Moving around the back, we have our triple camera system that also includes a time of flight sensor to help with portrait mode and AR apps. The first of these cameras is our main 50 megapixel f1.9 aperture camera with 1.22 micron sized pixels. By default, these pixels are binned or combined in a 2x2 square. This gives us lower resolution, but with much better low light performance and dynamic range in general. So from the 50 megapixel with 1.22 micron sized pixels, we end up getting a 12.5 megapixel image using 2.44 micron sized pixels. Also, that all means that the sensor size is 1 by 1.28 inches, which is just slightly larger than the S20 Ultra's 1 by 1.33 inch and the Find X2 Pro's 1 by 1.43 inch sensor size. Frankly, this is a race that I'm happy to see happening all of a sudden, as I love the fact that these larger sensors can accept more light by having more room for those larger pixels, really, and they have better natural bokeh, the blurred separation between the subject and the background. Now, another interesting thing about this sensor is the fact that instead of using RGB, they use an RYYB pattern. So red, yellow, yellow, blue. Bottom line, without getting overly technical here, the use of yellow instead of green lets about 40% more light to hit the photo site, so low light images should be further improved. In addition to this, the sensor is also optically stabilized and also supports all pixel autofocus instead of the more traditional dual pixel autofocus. The general idea here is that the sensor can use 100% of the pixels to detect focus, as well as it has some changes to the sensor's micro lens layout, and without going too far down that rabbit hole, that means it can detect edges better and focus faster, as well as focus better in lower light. Next, we have a 40 megapixel f1.8 ultra-wide camera that also bins its pixels in a similar fashion to get 10 megapixel images with larger pixels. Then, we have our 12 megapixel f3.4 telephoto camera with OIS that is a 5 times optical zoom. To get this focal length, they're using a folded design that actually sits sideways in the phone and uses a set of mirrors to get the length needed without protruding out of the back of the phone like a traditional mirrorless camera lens would need to. Because of the fact that it's an optical zoom, we get good results, up to 5 times, and 10 times is even okay. But once you start passing 10 times, it starts to get more and more oil painting-like, as it does with any of these flagships lately. I mean, at least they didn't stamp it in writing on the back of the phone, right? Another interesting thing about the telephoto camera, though, is that they managed to use an RYYB sensor like they did on the main camera. So again, low light should be improved. For video, it can shoot up to 4K at 60 frames per second. So no crazy 8K video recording like some of the others out right now. Now, let's quickly dive into the other camera modes on the phone. Aperture, which allows you to use software to blur the background from the subject. Portrait, basically the same as aperture, but it requires a person, and it allows you to add beauty filters, which always look terrifying to me, but maybe that's just me. Pro, which allows you to control things manually, ISO, shutter speed, etc., all in the viewfinder. Slow-mo allows you to record 32 times slow motion at 1080p or up to 256 times slow motion for only about a split second at 720p. Panorama allows you to start taking a photo and move it to have it stitch all of them together to create a panoramic wider shot. Monochrome takes a black and white photo, but seems dumb to me as you could just change the photo to black and white after the fact instead of being forced to only have it in black and white like this mode does. Frankly, it's probably left over from when Huawei used to use a strictly monochrome sensor and combine that with an RGB one, etc., but they just seem to never have taken out this mode. HDR, another redundant mode to me. It actually is on by default in the normal camera, so I'm not sure why you'd ever use this mode. Time-lapse lets you record and play things back sped up. Stickers lets you bake in watermarks into the photo, but again, I'd rather just add these after the fact than being forced to have them here when I take it and not being able to remove them. AR lens is very much like Instagram or Snapchat filters, tries to take advantage of the depth sensor on either the back or the front of the device to make it a little more accurate. Light painting allows you to capture a light source in a long exposure shot to create artistic streaks in the photo. Documents, when you take a photo of a piece of paper of some sort, it will let you crop it to that paper and then adjust the contrast to try to make it look like a scan. Dual view allows you to actually record a video using half the screen for one of the lenses and half the screen for one of the others. High res lets you take a photo at the full 50 megapixels of the main sensor to get more resolution at the cost of low light performance and dynamic range. And finally, night mode, which takes a series of long exposure shots and combines them to get a much better lit, low light image. You can check out my decoder episode on how night mode actually works at the link here if you want to learn more about that. Also in the camera, you can tap the icon at the top left to get AI Lens, which is Huawei's version of Google Lens. Go figure. And allows you to scan QR codes, translate text, and shop by pointing the camera at an item. And an editing feature that they added allows you to use AI to remove reflections when you take a photo, say, through a window, which as someone who takes a lot of photos out of airplane windows, or I guess I used to, I kind of like that. Moving on to the software, we have Huawei's EMUI 10.1 on top of the open source version of Android 10. Now, because that means it'll run very similar to any Huawei device that's come out lately, I won't dive too much into that. But let's quickly go through some of the standout features that Huawei has added, and then, yes, we'll talk about Google for those that are curious. Private Safe lets you create a separate home screen and really a separate phone almost, complete with different apps, files, photos, etc. And then you can just switch between it and your normal profile by using either a different PIN code or a different fingerprint when you unlock the phone. Multi-screen collab lets you see your phone screen on your Huawei-only laptop, drag and drop between the two, use your camera and mic on your computer to be used with the phone applications, as well as be able to open files directly from the phone on the computer without having to copy them over. MeTime was not installed on my phone, but it is something that Huawei launched alongside it and apparently has already been in use in China. But it is a video calling, audio calling app that supposedly is higher quality and is similar to FaceTime, and it's going to come preloaded on most devices. I assume mine will probably get an OTA with it, but we'll see. Something that is clever about it though, compared to FaceTime, is that it allows for screen sharing, as well as it can be accessed by third-party accessories. So, for example, you can start a video on the phone with MeTime, but then switch what the person sees from your front-facing camera, for example, to, say, the Drift Ghost action camera that's mounted to your helmet, which is one of the first partners to add this functionality, by the way. Air gesture. Using that depth sensor on the front of the phone, it can recognize your hand when held up to the screen and allow you to hold your palm up or down to scroll up or down on a page, or make a fist to take a screenshot. Yes, this is similar to what LG did and then immediately stopped doing after, and what Google did with the Pixel 4, albeit with radar. Truth is, all of these air gestures feel like an engineer said, hey, look what we can do with this tech, which is great, but in reality it, one, takes longer than using your finger or buttons to actually do the action, and then two, it makes you look ridiculous. Finally, there's a decent amount of bloatware on the device, even folders that just say games or social, business, etc. And when you tap on them, it actually opens App Advisor, which as far as I can tell is Huawei's way of pushing apps that are in their own app gallery onto you. This, of course, at least in my mind, is probably a way that Huawei is enticing larger developers to port their apps to their new app store. Do so and we can promote you prominently on device, etc. Which brings us to the Google dilemma. Now, a quick recap for those who might not know. Google and Huawei can't do business, and that's because of a trade embargo between the US and China. Now, while most people just think that this means that the Huawei phones don't have Google apps like Gmail in the Play Store and Google Maps, etc., it actually goes deeper than that, to also include a collection of pretty popular APIs and services that Google offers to other app makers to make their apps easier to make as part of GMS or Google Mobile Services. So, login management, location services, etc. are provided by GMS to make app development easier for developers, so even non-Google apps are affected. Now, Huawei has their own app store called App Gallery, and their own version of these APIs and services called HMS, or Huawei Mobile Services. So, technically with HMS, they can give developers a way to add back in that functionality that GMS helped with, and with the App Gallery, they have a way to distribute the apps on their devices. The issue is that this still requires developers to add in the HMS code and make their apps available in the App Gallery, and well, at the moment at least, not a lot of the more popular ones, at least the ones that I use, at least the ones here in the Western Hemisphere, have done so. With a few exceptions, like a couple of Microsoft apps and Amazon apps, oddly enough. Now, Huawei is committed to spending $1 billion to try to get more developers in each local market to do just that. But it's taking some time, as expected. In the meantime, here is what it's like to use this phone without GMS. Now, firstly, I was able to get a decent amount of my apps from the LG V60 that I was using right before this onto the P40 Pro pretty quickly by just installing the Phone Clone app from the Play Store. Yes, this app is still in there for whatever reason. And opening it on both phones, it'll copy all of your contacts, texts, and even your apps. Now, it didn't install all of them. Google Apps, of course, didn't come, but neither did a few others for some reason, so I just went and installed APK Pure, an app store replacement, and got the rest through that. Opening those apps makes you realize the extent that GMS is used, as a bunch of them yell at you the minute they open, saying they won't work without Google Play services. Others I have connected to my Google account to log into, so tapping that button to log in just doesn't do anything. Now, to get around some of this, I downloaded Chrome from the APK Pure store. Then I was able to get some of the sign-in with Google's to work as it just opened Chrome and let me log in via the web page. Then for Gmail and my Google Calendar, both of which I use to run my business, I used Microsoft's Outlook, also from APK Pure. And that actually works pretty well, even lets me swipe to archive and snooze, etc., just the way I'm used to, so that solved my need for those. After that, I was able to go to Google Maps mobile site and save it to my home screen, which made it look like an app, and opening it, it lets me log in with Google to get all of my map data in the browser. Then it also grabs my location from that browser, and it lets me use it for directions basically like the app does. I did this for a few of the more crucial apps that I need on a daily basis, and some of them worked as well as the app, for the most part, like Todoist, for example. And some I have to force the desktop view to get them to work like I want, like Google Drive. There is, however, just one app that I use a lot that I truly could not find a workaround for, and that's Lyft and Uber. They apparently use GMS for location services, and since there is not a web version of their app, there's no other way to use them. Right now, we're all quarantined, so it's not affecting me in the slightest, but normally, that would be a big problem for me. Bottom line, as someone who is very ingrained in Google's services, I was able to use the phone without them. Now, there was definitely some friction and definitely some inconvenience. But if I had to, minus the lack of the ride sharing, I could. The question is this phone enough to make me maybe forego my Google ties and use this phone over another phone that has GMS? No, it's not. But it's a lot less of a leap than I expected. And if Huawei does manage to get a bunch of those big app developers in the app gallery, that leap is going to be smaller and smaller. Now, of course, if you're not in the Western Hemisphere, or you just don't really care about Google services, or most of the apps that I just listed are having a hard time working, then this doesn't really pertain to you. And I tried to save all of the Google stuff in this video for the end, just, so that most of it was pertaining to everybody, and then just the people who care about Google's at the end. But for those of you that didn't care, I apologize, I guess, for you having to sit through that part. Regardless though, the P40 Pro starts at 899 euros and will be available in most of the launch regions on April 7th. Now, I'll leave a link to wherever I can find the best price on it for anyone interested in learning more about it below. There you go, complete walkthrough. Really long one. The Google thing, it made it a lot longer. But I hope that this was helpful. You guys, again, told me to go as in depth as possible. That's kind of a big factor about this phone for at least certain people, so I wanted to include it and also kind of just show my experience with it. Either way, hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please thumbs up it or share it. It's greatly appreciated. Also check out the rest of the channel. If you like what you see there, please subscribe and ding the bell next to word subscribe so you get notified when I do new videos. And as always though, regardless, thanks for watching.